If you don't know me, I'm Hillary Hayden. I'm the organizing director at the Trade Justice Education Fund, and we are a national organization that's working to stop the damage of corporate-centered trade deals and promote a positive vision for international trade. These Trade Justice Power Hour calls happen every third Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, and they cover a wide range of educational topics about trade policy for activists across the country. I do want to note quickly that these calls are not intended as press briefings. So if you're a member of the press, I am more than happy to find time to talk with you separately, but this is not the place for press questions. Just quickly, by way of an agenda for today, I'm going to give a little bit of framing around our call, and then I'm going to pass it off to Trade Justice's Executive Director, Arthur Stamolis, who's going to talk us through the USMCA campaign and importantly share some updates on the public comment period. So after that, I think we're going to have time for some questions. So please go ahead and put those questions in the Q&A feature as we go. We're going to get to as many of those as we can. So folks who attend these briefings regularly will know that the US's single biggest trade deal, which is the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the USMCA, is currently up for a mandatory review. We've shared here that the Trump administration is required by law to initiate a public comment period on what changes the public wants to see in that USMCA renegotiation process. That's a notice that we've talked about in prior calls was coming sometime before October 4th. And the big update that I wanted to make sure got shared here today is that on Tuesday of this week, that public comment period notice was published. And on Wednesday morning, the public comment period itself opened. I do want to say up front that this public comment period itself is our biggest and best opportunity to demand that the USMCA be renegotiated in the ways that it needs to be renegotiated to benefit working people on the planet rather than just a few narrow corporate interests. To discuss this opportunity and how we can engage, we're going to hear first today from Arthur Stamolis, Trade Justice's Executive Director. And then, like I said, I'm going to come back on to discuss some of the nuts and bolts about how we're collecting comments and that kind of thing before we take some of your questions. Arthur, thank you so much for being here to talk to us about this important moment. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Hillary, and hello, everybody. I appreciate you all being here today. So just starting with some basic context. During his first term in office, President Trump promised that the USMCA was going to bring jobs pouring back into the United States, and he said the deal was necessary because of our country's massive trade deficit under the original NAFTA agreement. We're now more than 5 years into the USMCA. We have the data. The cumulative U.S. trade deficit with Mexico and Canada over the past 5 years is almost double what it was in the 5 years prior to the USMCA taking effect. So Trump himself called the NAFTA the worst trade deal ever. He wasn't far off on that. But relative to NAFTA, the deficit is up 192.7% under the USMCA, which is a lot higher than the increase in our deficit with the rest of the world over the same period. So Trump's trade deal hasn't made things better. Things have in fact gotten significantly worse. Under the USMCA, we've seen imports in everything from autos to agriculture to aerospace all surge. We've seen companies continue to ship jobs to Mexico to take advantage of ongoing worker rights abuses, abysmally low wages, lax pollution controls. And on top of that, the USMCA continues to be packed full of provisions that expand corporate power and threaten public interest policies in a variety of areas, from food safety to the environment to online privacy and more. So this USMCA renegotiation, as Hillary just said, this is our opportunity to address many of these problems. But that's only going to happen if people come together and demand that working families' interests come first. If we leave things up to the president and his billionaire advisors, things at best will stay as bad as they already are, and much more likely will continue to get even worse as the Trump administration further puts the interests of greedy corporations ahead of those of working people, of family farmers, of communities. So, what makes me say that? Like, how do we know what direction Trump's policy is headed in? To start, on the USMCA specifically, we've been told that the Trump administration, in partnership with the Canadian and Mexican governments, has already conducted the mandatory 5-year reviews of the USMCA's labor and environmental chapters, two of the most important chapters in the entire pact. The Environment Committee's report, which came out in late June, you can find on the USTR website. It's there for anyone to read. That report is only 1 page long. One page is shockingly short. A child's report card is often double-sided, right? This report is supposed to discuss the environmental ramifications of trade between the United States and our two biggest trading partners in the world, what countries have done over the past 5 years to make that trade more sustainable, and more importantly, what countries can do together in the future. And on all of that, they came up with a single sheet of text. That one-page report cites law enforcement measures along the southern border as one of the United States' biggest environmental achievements, which is just gross. And even grosser, the report makes no recommendations whatsoever for environmental improvements moving forward. We're living on this planet in the midst of a climate crisis. On top of that, there are air quality, water quality, deforestation, marine conservation, biodiversity, all sorts of environmental issues going on every day throughout North America. Even if you're not into environmental protection for the sake of healthy communities, we know that US firms often offshore work to take advantage of weak environmental enforcement abroad. So the idea that they're not making any improvements to the USMCA environment chapter, that's very concerning. On top of that, we were told just last week that the Labor Council's 5-year report on the USMCA has supposedly also been complete for months now. I can't tell you anything about what's in that report, though, because unlike the environmental report, USTR hasn't published the labor report. Is it one page? Is it 300 pages? Does it make similar recommendations to what we've been calling for on labor rights enforcement, on wage increases, on anti-circumvention measures, or does it make no recommendations at all? Like, we have no idea what our government is saying in our names. I've been so desperate to get my hands on this report, I finally reached out to the Canadian government and asked them for a copy. And I heard from Canadian officials, not yesterday, but the day before yesterday, that the labor report isn't actually done yet, that it's still ongoing. So, did the Trump administration trade staff who said that the labor report was already completed, did they not know what they were talking about? Were they lying? Does the Canadian government not know what's going on? Like, in any scenario, this isn't good. And I'll say, this is a major shift from the first Trump administration. During the first Trump administration, we had labor partners who were consulted on things. That's not happening anymore. And that's one reason why this current public comment period is so important. In recent months, the Trump administration has been conducting trade negotiations with multiple countries, and Trump's cabinet level trade official, US Trade Representative Jameson Greer, said explicitly during a congressional hearing that there will not be public comment periods for any of these other trade negotiations. You, me, labor groups, environmental groups, no one but Trump's billionaire advisors and the best connected corporate lobbyists will get any official opportunity to weigh in on those trade deals whatsoever. For most of the trade deals being inked right now, our opportunity to comment on the terms of those deals only comes after the deals are done and after the terms are locked into place. And the reason why the USMCA review has any public participation procedures at all is because activists like you made a stink about trade transparency 6 years ago, and Congress passed a law requiring that the USMCA renegotiation have a comment period. So we need to take advantage. And we need to take advantage because if you look at the trajectory of all these trade deals that don't have public comment periods, that have been negotiated completely behind closed doors, they've been complete and utter trash. First of all, many of these bilateral trade deals have bound the United States to put hard caps on tariff rates, especially in strategic industries like automobiles, aerospace, pharmaceuticals. We hear a lot about Trump raising tariffs. We hear a lot less about how he's struck multiple trade deals in which the US caps its tariff rates. And in exchange for those caps, he's agreed to completely fluffy, non-binding promises from other countries to look into potentially opening markets for US products, to look into potentially purchasing US goods, to look into potentially making investments. We're trading something real for something imaginary, which just from a purely mercantile perspective is one of the weakest, most soft-boiled series of agreements I've ever seen issued on paper on, not only on trade, but for anything. I mean, it's pure theater in terms of actual jobs benefits for the US. And that's something that nobody is talking about. The only concrete thing that Trump has gotten other countries to agree to in his trade deal making thus far is to cut taxes for big tech billionaires. Canada, the European Union, India, I mean, three very, very big players have all cut taxes for tech companies in exchange for tariff reductions. Something that does nothing whatsoever to create jobs or expand manufacturing in the United States, but presumably is going to put a lot more money back in the pockets of billionaires like Bezos and Zuckerberg and Musk and their ilk. That's it in terms of real agreements. And then, not 100% concrete, but at least put on paper as an agreed to policy direction, Trump's bilateral deals with Europe and Britain, plus his special 301 investigation against Brazil, his threatened 301 investigation against the EU, plus his Truth Social tariff threats against the rest of the world. They're all pushing big tech's digital trade policy agenda, which we know is all about undermining personal privacy, data security, AI accountability, right to repair, and the anti-monopoly policies, both at home and abroad. In terms of binding trade deal commitments, these policy changes aren't set in stone yet, but they're referenced as something that the countries will work on together, which is more concrete than a lot of the other language in these deals. And there's something that Trump is bringing the hammer down on in terms of tariff threats and tariff investigations. He's not bringing the hammer down to get countries to eradicate forced labor, eradicate child labor, allow for independent unions, to meet environmental treaty obligations, or do anything else that would help create jobs and lift wages in the US and contribute to a more just and sustainable economy globally. Instead, he's bringing the hammer down to help big tech eliminate public interest policies globally. And as a reminder, let's just talk for a second about what big tech's digital trade agenda is. First, they want the ability to ship your personal data, your financial data, your personal health data, your genomics, your bioindicators, your geolocation, like everything. They want the ability to ship that data around the globe without regards to personal privacy or data security standards. One reason they want to do that is so that they can sell the data to whoever they want. And another is so that they can store and process that data wherever they want. Once the data is out of the United States, it's not subject to the jurisdiction of any privacy or data security rules we enact. So your recourse if the data is lost, stolen, whatever, is pretty much zilch. Your ability to have the data deleted is pretty much zilch. So not good from a personal privacy perspective, an online safety perspective. And then from a labor perspective, a major reason the companies want to store and process your data abroad is so that they can do so more cheaply, which is going to mean a lot more job loss for American workers and a race to the bottom in wages and working conditions for everyone else. Just like with the manufacturing sector, companies want the ability to store data wherever energy costs are the lowest, meaning countries with weak environmental standards. They want access to labor pools in countries where labor standards are weak, so they can use just-in-time contractors with few, if any, rights rather than having to hire actual employees. And they, of course, want access to workers who are paid cheap as dirt wages. So this is horrible for jobs, horrible for wages. And the other major thing that big tech is pushing for in its digital trade agenda is source code and algorithm secrecy guarantees that would make effective oversight and accountability for artificial intelligence virtually impossible. They want to ensure that there's no accountability for the AI that increasingly hires, fires, supervises people in the workplace, for the AI that increasingly determines what information you do and don't get access to in your social media feeds, your internet searches. I mean, these days, even in your email inbox, for the AI that increasingly makes determinations about what loan rates people get, what things insurance adjusters will and won't cover, even what sort of prison sentences judges hand down to people. And that's not even to mention the AI that could in the future be operating the truck driving by you on the highway or the drone flying overhead. And, you know, the reason that companies don't want oversight of any of this should be obvious. But the reason that people should want some oversight and accountability, you know, those are pretty obvious too. And right now, the administration is looking out for big tech here, not for the majority. Advancing big tech's agenda has been the single biggest priority in the Trump administration's bilateral trade deals thus far. And so when we approach the USMCA renegotiation, while we try to get the bad digital language that Trump added 6 years ago removed, we shouldn't be surprised to see big tech pushing to get even worse provisions added. Um, you know, beyond the giveaways to big tech, the recent EU trade deal also includes language in which the Europeans promise to address the concerns corporations have raised about their climate, forestry, and corporate responsibility policies. There's also some language in deals, at least opening the door to potential reductions in food safety standards and opening the door to expanded intellectual property protections for pharmaceutical monopolies. So again, you know, nothing on labor rights, nothing on wages, nothing to create jobs or protect the environment, but massive new giveaways for big tech and potential new giveaways to big pharma, big ag, and big oil. That's not making things better, that's making things worse. And this USMCA public comment period very well could be our only official opportunity during the entire Trump presidency to call out this privileging of corporate interests over working people. You know, the only way we're going to reverse these corporate giveaways and put jobs and wages and other public interest issues back on the agenda is by shining a spotlight on the broken promises to our communities and by introducing some accountability in the USMCA review process. You know, if trade officials think they can get away with doing all this in the shadows, like nothing is going to change. But if we can get mass numbers of people weighing in during the public comment period, demanding more, illustrating to officials that the public is watching and knows what they're up to, that's our best chance for changing direction here. So, Hillary, let me turn it back over to you to talk about how we can take advantage of this moment. Thanks, everyone, again, for all your work.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Arthur, for that framing around the importance of the USMCA review. And as you said, this upcoming public comment period is very, very important. So we need folks not just submitting comments themselves, but also working to get other folks to submit public comments as well. I am happy to report that Trade Justice currently has more than 24 national labor and civil society groups lined up together to take advantage of this public comment period and encourage their members to submit comments. This includes the largest industrial unions in the United States, the largest environmental organizations, the largest consumer groups, and many others. Together, these groups are all going to be sending out email blasts to their members and their supporters, and because of that, millions of Americans are going to be getting emails from organizations that they trust, explaining how Trump's USMCA deal has privileged corporations over working families, and how we need to push for changes to that pact that are needed to finally put working people's interests first. More than 20 of those groups have endorsed a joint action platform through which people can sign on to joint public comments to the USTR. And a number of other groups are creating comment submission platforms of their own. These are often focused on template messaging appropriate to like one or two specific issue areas. So as a result, this fall, more and more people are going to be hearing progressive trade messaging, and they're going to be encouraged to take action. More people, maybe, than at any point during the Trump presidency, and maybe more people than at any point since the height of the TPP campaign over a decade ago. Um, this engagement on the public comment is a critical step toward introducing some accountability into the USMCA review process. But we do need folks' help here too. And the first thing that everybody on this call should do right now is click the link that I think Clayton's going to drop in the chat and fill out that public comment form yourself. It should take you to an Action Network page. This is the joint action submission I was just talking about. Please take a second to fill that out to submit public comments to the U.S. Trade Rep. Aside from submitting comment yourself, there's going to be another link in the chat in a second that will take you to a web form that you can use to sign up for an information toolkit to help you promote the public comment period and otherwise indicate your interest in taking action. So I think that link will be there in just a second. Uh, we're asking that you start thinking about three things. First, if you represent a union local, a community group, another organization, or you somehow otherwise have access to an email list for an organization that you're a part of, will you please commit to sending out an email blast urging people to submit public comments? If your answer to that question is yes, we're going to send a couple of options for email blast language that you can use, as well as links to that online web platform that people can sign the template comments through. So again, that platform is already endorsed, not just by trade justice, but by some of the biggest labor, environment, consumer, and other groups in the country. So if you have access to an email list, please take a moment now to request those materials to send along to that email list, and we're going to be in touch to be sure that you have everything you need. Second, maybe you don't maintain an organizational email list, but you're a member of a listserv or some other place that you can post to with a message about the public comment period. If your answer to that question is yes, we're going to also send you some template language that you can send to your listserv or other location. So again, please check the appropriate box on the form and we'll get that information out to folks. And then lastly, maybe you're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, True Social, some other social media platform. Click the appropriate boxes in that form, and we're going to send out some template social media language and links that you can post to further raise the profile of the public comment period. If you've got other ideas for spreading the word, you can raise them in the Q&A. You can also indicate them briefly on that web form as well. So it's really important that folks sign up through that web form so we know who to follow up with. We'll make sure to get folks everything that they need to participate in the ways that they're able. So the thing I'll say here is that big groups that are participating in this action campaign already have a wide reach, but you can help us to reach even more people. And just as importantly, help us ensure that a lot of people are hearing about this thing from more than one or two groups or people, right? There are some studies out there. I'm not sure how accurate they are, and I won't vouch for them. But the substance does make sense to me. And those studies suggest that people need to hear about an issue 6 or 7 times on average before it starts to resonate with them as something that they need to do themselves. So if you all help us to spread the word about this, sign up to share the public comment period out, we can get a lot more people paying attention, taking action, and that kind of thing, which is what we really need to ultimately introduce some accountability into this process and make change. So again, please take a second, fill out that form that Clayton dropped in the chat. We are going to be sure to get folks everything that they need. So I think with that, I do want to take a second to turn to Q&A. If you have questions, uh, please put those questions in the Q&A. Thank you for your question, Terry. I always get this question. I will be sending out a follow-up email either later today or tomorrow morning that's going to have the link to the form, the link to the public comment period, and kind of a recap of this call, also a recording of this call. So yes, folks will have either later today or early tomorrow, you'll have all those resources in your inbox. Oh, there we go. Put other questions in the Q&A. We have folks requesting Arthur speak to their group. Arthur, are you willing to talk to a couple of groups? We can try to figure that out separately, Nicole. I'm happy to put that down to reach out to you. Other questions that folks have about the public comment. Um, Thanks, Judy, for this question. Arthur, maybe you can address this one. I'm going to throw this one to you. What are the best recent studies on job loss and the need for improvements of labor standards in the USMCA?
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Judy. So there are a few sort of, I don't know, studies might be a big word to use, but there's a lot of data about the impacts of the USMCA to date. I mean, you can break down the trade deficit data by what are called HTS codes. which, basically every single product type has different categories of HDS codes. And this is how we know that the trade deficit overall with Canada and Mexico over the past 5 years of the USMCA is up 192.7% over the trade deficit in the same time period before the USMCA. Again, we're seeing surges in autos, in aerospace, in agriculture. And if you're a member of another industry and you want help looking up the data on that, we can find that. In terms of the labor rights, I know that there's a big study coming out later this month, which shows. I mean, the labor protections that labor groups, trade justice activists, and Democrats in Congress managed to get added to the USMCA, because if we recall, the original text proposed for the USMCA didn't have anything on labor enforcement, but with a lot of pushback, we got some stuff added. That has been used effectively on, over 30 instances, to help workers struggling for independent unions get those unions recognized, who are fired illegally, to get rehired and to get back pay, to get better contracts. And this has, benefited tens of thousands of workers in Mexico, which is really, really important. But millions of workers still haven't, are still facing the same types of violations, are still involved in heavily traded sectors of the economy, and haven't had their rights respected, which of course is the major incentive for companies to offshore jobs, and plays a major, major role in the downward pressure on wages and benefits in the jobs that are left. So, these are the things that labor groups and others are pushing for in the USMCA renegotiation. Let's get even stronger labor enforcement. Let's get some first ever environmental enforcement to address companies that are moving jobs abroad to take advantage of lax pollution controls, and not to mention stop them from polluting communities. And let's also make sure that there are provisions in there that actually raise wages. The trajectory, if we had strong labor and environmental standards that were actually enforced, would be to raise wages over time. But, let's get that ball rolling much, much faster by just flat out requiring some wage increases in this agreement. So these are some of the things folks are pushing for.
Super helpful, Arthur. Okay, we have a bunch of questions. No dumb questions in the Q&A. Maria, thanks for your question on the deadline to comment. I'm pretty sure that that deadline is November 3rd. Uh,
Right, yeah, the public comment period, which opened yesterday, is open for 45 days. So that ends November 3rd. We're asking people to get their comments in by Halloween. So if you're, using our web form, if you're promoting stuff on social media, over email lists, which we absolutely need everybody to do, try to get that out this month if you can, early next month. And then at the end of October, we'll be compiling all the numbers and making one last grand push before to that November 3rd deadline.
we are in touch with PDA. Donna, appreciate that suggestion. And I will continue to figure out how to engage. That's really interesting about the rural and blue collar workers that they're organizing. Arthur, Carl asks, is it effective to have labor activists in Mexico submitting public comments, or is this something that should be more focused on folks in the US?
I would say that labor advocates in Mexico and Canada should by all means submit comments. I mean, I think if there are independent unions or other labor advocacy groups that want to submit substantive comments or much more detailed anecdotes, I think that would be very, very helpful. My understanding is that Mexico will shortly be having a comment period of their own. I don't have the dates or details on that yet. But in terms of like pointing grassroots activists in Mexico towards something, I would focus on trying to move the Mexican government. And thank you, Carl, for all your work. We really appreciate it.
Um,
And Louise mentions that Mexico already opened the comment period. So that's fantastic. And Louise, if you have any links to that, we'll happily promote those as well. Thank you.
Arthur, could you talk just a little bit um, in more detail about how AI is affecting jobs and the job market?
Yeah, and while I'm doing that, if, I don't know, Hillary or Clayton, if you're able to quickly pull up the AFL-CIO white paper on a worker-centered trade agenda. That is, a relatively short paper that I highly recommend people take a look at.
The
We've had,
digital trade one.
yeah, a
Got it.
worker-centered digital trade agenda. Yeah. Highly recommend people look at that. We also have somewhere in our YouTube account, I think Patrick Woodall, the author of that report, gave a briefing on it. Gosh, it was a while back now. But basically, what big tech is looking for in trade agreements right now are rules that guarantee algorithm and source code secrecy. That's the way that they frame it, and that's what the language says in the agreements. Which basically means they don't have to give any information about their algorithms, their source codes, their artificial intelligence, because that's what AI is, to regulators or anyone in government outside of the bounds of, an exact law enforcement case, like a trial, like someone's broken the law. Yeah, okay. Governments can subpoena information in that case, but regulators can't get access to it. And they say we need these rules in place because otherwise other countries are just going to steal our technology. So, don't make us tell anything about our AI to regulators. Um, it's a BS argument because there are already provisions written into international trade law that forbid governments from sharing corporations' proprietary information with anyone else when they're requesting it for regulatory purposes. And the biggest example of this is in the pharmaceutical industry. All governments ask pharmaceutical companies for their drug formularies, for information on how drugs are produced, for their data on the safety and effectiveness of their medications. Every single government, maybe not every single government, but almost all governments require this of the pharmaceutical industry, and they don't share that information with other companies, with other competitors. That information is kept private. And if a company had concerns about a particular government stealing that data, having the rules in a trade agreement that say, again, you can't do this wouldn't make things any better, right? It's only the governments that respect the rules we're going to follow the rules in the first place. And so what these rules means is that regulators can never get access to this information, and it makes effective oversight and accountability of AI virtually impossible. All the big tech groups, all the big academics that look at AI policy and are recommending AI policies for the future, when they see these digital trade rules, they go, "This is outrageous. Uh, this is horrible. We can't do this." I mean, AI Now Institute at Columbia, we've had on in the past talking about this, and so it's a bad deal. And corporations know they could never get this through the front door if they just tried to pass a law in Congress saying, "Thou shalt not regulate AI." That would be killed instantly. I mean, even in the Republican budget, the big beautiful bill that passed, corporations tried to have language in there preventing states from regulating AI, and there was massive pushback against that, not only from Democrats but also from a number of Republicans, and that language got removed. Well, they're still trying to sneak in similar language into our trade agreements because most policymakers hear free trade and they think, oh, this is great. They don't really take the time to learn the details about the dangers of these proposals. And so what that means for the workplace, I mean, a lot of companies nowadays, I mean, particularly big employers, people are wearing like wearable devices on their clothes that track their every movement to make sure that they're maximizing their efficiency, that they're not taking too many bathroom breaks, that they're, moving stuff as quickly as humanly possible. And people have been, fired and let go where their human boss has no idea why, just the algorithm told them to. And they can't, they think the worker's doing a good job, but the algorithm said, you're fired, so you're fired. There are other examples of hiring algorithms weeding out women, people who have female sounding names because in the algorithm's experience, men are faster, stronger, work harder. I don't know what the algorithm thinks. There's all sorts of examples like this. And there's reasons why as our society moves further and further and further into AI that we're going to want a little oversight and accountability here. And these trade agreements would make that virtually impossible. So that's one reason, one of the big things that we're pushing against, in addition to the things on labor standards and wages and anti-circumvention that we're pushing for.
Thanks, Arthur, for that context. I was living in Seattle at the time when Amazon's like hiring algorithm started rooting out women because like historically they haven't been tech workers, and so the data like reflects that bias. Um, all right. Thank you so much, Luis, for sharing that public comment period information. And Donna, I noted the names of the folks that you shared, and I will reach out to PDA about that afterward. I think. I think we got to everybody's questions. I want to give a big thank you to folks that submitted questions for the Q&A. So I think we're going to leave the Q&A there. I want to give a big thanks to Arthur for presenting to us today, walking us through this important moment in the USMCA campaign. I want to thank folks for joining us, and I want to please encourage you to keep an eye out for my follow-up email, which is going to have a link to the form if you have not had a chance to fill it out yet. Please be sure and fill that out. Request materials you need so that we can really get folks submitting comments through this public comment period. A member of our staff is going to follow up to make sure that you have what you need. Thanks again, everyone, for being here, for all your questions and engagement, and we'll be in touch soon. Have a great afternoon, everyone.